Hey everyone, it's Matt with Spiceworks bringing you another Spiceworks Partner webinar. Virtualization efficiency is a breeze. Let us show you the ways. Brought to you by WD. Let's start with some housekeeping. There's a Q&A box on your screen to the left. Please don't be shy. We really encourage questions. This is a great chance for you to get insight from a real expert. All you have to do is type in your question and click Submit. We're going to get to the questions at the end of the presentation via a verbal Q&A, so stick around with us. If your question isn't addressed live, WD will be able to follow up with you. And please, during the presentation, there will be a live demo. So we encourage you to enlarge your slide view by clicking the green button on the upper right-hand corner of that window. Another thing to remember is that we are recording this webinar. So if you have to step out for a bit, it's no big deal. You'll get a link to this recording in a few days. It will be an on-demand presentation, so you can check it out as many times as you'd like. And that's about all I have. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jeff Coppersmith. He is a senior sales engineer for WD. And a little bit later, during the Q&A, he'll be joined by his colleague, Britton Spagnola. So Jeff, take it away.
Well, thank you, Matt, and welcome, Spiceheads. Thanks for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about virtualization. As Matt said, I'm a sales engineer with Western Digital, so my team is actually responsible for not only working with product management on upcoming features, but we also do a lot of installations for proof of concept. So Spiceworks thought this would be a good use of that expertise to kind of share some of the things that we see on a regular basis when we're out in the field, helping customers design a backup strategy around their virtual environment, or maybe even a partial virtual environment. So obviously today's main topic is going to be virtualization. And we'll start by talking about the unique backup options for virtual machines. Knowing what you want out of your virtual environment will help you outline what hardware is required for that infrastructure so that it can perform as you'd expect it to, and hopefully consolidate some of that extraneous hardware you may have in the environment that may either be out of date or undersized. So then we'll talk about the how to maximize the potential of this expensive hardware. It's important to make sure that you get the most value out of this virtual host environment. WD can help make the rest of the process very simple, but we'll talk more about that near the end of the presentation. So in the end, we'll recap what choices to make in order to make sure that your network is capable of not only your immediate needs, but also future growth. Western Digital and our WD Network Content Solution team is committed to helping ease the burden of today's systems administrator. We approach this process responsibly, and doing so can ensure that your risk of exposure is minimized. The risk of hardware failure is by far the most concerning aspect of virtualization, so making sure that you've done this responsibly will help everybody sleep better at night. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into today's presentation. And the first thing that we want to do is build a backup strategy. And this is not as simple as you would necessarily expect. Different types of data require special types of backup policies. Your environment might require one or many of the following options. File backups specifically are good at protecting workstations and file servers, but applications require special attention. And extremely important machines, maybe your order system or something like that, they have an especially short restore time objective. Should anything happen to those machines, you want to get them up and running as quickly as possible. And an image level or bare metal restore would be the easiest way to restore an entire server, including all of the data and applications that were on it at the time of failure, or at least at the time of the last backup job. So the restore point objective is the acceptable amount of time in between your backup jobs. Essentially, that data is at risk in between your backup jobs until you've performed the next one. So keeping that backup as frequent as possible helps minimize the amount of data that's susceptible to loss. The more backup jobs you perform in a particular retention policy will also increase the amount of storage, so those two factors are going to be linked directly. The longer you wait between your backup jobs, again, the more data is at risk of being lost. So a backup policy should weigh the storage required with the acceptable amount of risk to reach your cost-effective balance between these two options. Keep in mind that when you're creating your specific backup strategy, your production equipment will be affected during your backup job. And this is where we get the advent of a term called the backup window. It's essentially the amount of time it takes your backups to run on a given day. The processing requirements in a virtual environment are different than what you have with physical machines because of the shared nature of that hardware, and we'll talk more in detail about that in this presentation as well. So obviously, the reason we're here today is because WD has a number of networked content storage products available to help you ease the growth of your virtual environment into the future. The MyCloud products can handle most small and medium office requirements. But for those who need a little bit more horsepower, we have the WD Sentinel line. And these storage products actually come pre-installed with a Microsoft operating system. So that gives you the WD performance with the proven technology of Microsoft. And the goal here, obviously, is to make sure that not only are our solutions scalable, allowing you to increase data growth, but also provide the redundancy features that business class solutions must have. Okay, so a virtual environment. When it comes to creating a virtual environment, the costs of that virtual environment can run much deeper than just the hypervisor licenses themselves. For those of you who aren't familiar, a hypervisor is a form of software that gets installed onto one very large piece of hardware, allowing you to run multiple machines on that same piece of hardware. An analogy I like to use, being a bit of a car guy myself, is you may have a very large automobile, but only one person can drive that at a time. Virtualization is effectively allowing multiple drivers to all have their own experience in that automobile all at the same time. You can follow that metaphor. So the hardware itself is by far the most significant cost in pretty much all virtual environments. Most people choose to start out with a small subset of their most important servers and then migrate off to, most people are shooting for 100% virtual environment, but in practice we see that even people who have managed to get to 100% virtualization usually come back with a couple of physical machines just because of their unique nature. So because of that expensive hardware, the demand for available memory grows each time you add another virtual machine to the inventory. This is why people tend to start small. The storage options from WD specifically are available from 2 up to 16 terabytes of growth. Again, the more data you have, it's probably going to relate to more virtual machines, and that's going to require more memory as well. But the growth and the fault tolerance are built into all of our products. So since no hardware is 100% reliable, a redundant environment will provide an added level of protection. The flip side of that coin is that hardware failover is a very fast, maybe even the fastest way to recover from hardware failure. There are many types of hardware failure. That's by far the most common thing that people think about when it comes to data loss. But natural disasters or user error, there are a lot of other things that compromise data other than hardware failure. But hardware failure is easy to overcome, again, with a redundant array for your, or even multiple arrays for your storage targets. So this is definitely going to benefit many sleep-deprived admins that have been up trying to get this all squared away in the event of a loss before business begins the next morning. So let's talk briefly about the available hypervisor options that are on the market. There's a number of products available from many different vendors. And all of them in the end provide the software necessary to run a virtual environment. Again, this is called in the industry a hypervisor. Software gets installed onto your virtual host hardware, and choosing the one that works for you, again, is not always selecting the best known option. That by far is going to be the VMware family of hypervisors. I've definitely been playing this game quite a bit longer than the others in this list, and they do have a greater feature set as a result. Not all of those features may be required in your environment, but the main thing that people are looking for when it comes to backing up virtual environments is what's called an agentless backup. This is a very quick way to protect your virtual machines and their data because it requires no time to install and configure any local agents. A single agent gets installed onto something like a backup server, allowing it to communicate with that virtual environment. Additional options from other vendors like the Microsoft Hyper-V does back up with a single agent loaded onto the host. So you don't have to install local agents inside of each one of the guest operating systems. But as you'll see from this slide here, it does have some restrictions as far as the type of backups that you can offer. Both the Microsoft and the Citrix offerings supporting full backups only are going to make features like deduplication extremely important when it comes to efficiently utilizing the storage that you've designated for your backup environment. So WD has another webinar in our series if you'd like to know more about these specific virtualization offerings or even more about our deduplication. So I'll leave it for there. I'll leave it with that for now. But we just wanted to point out that there are many different virtualization options out there. So keep in mind, especially if you have just begun to look into virtualization, or if you're trying to figure out how to go forward, maybe increase your utilization of this virtual technology. The biggest and the brightest, while being the most feature-rich, is not necessarily the only option you can go with. It may make finding a backup solution harder, but there are solutions like WD Archaea's product family that can protect all of these options with the same user interface. Okay, so from there we're going to talk about how people's virtual environments are utilized. Once you've selected your appropriate hypervisor, the next step is to figure out what the structure of your workload will be. Throughout the day, your physical or your virtual environment is going to have varying degrees of workload depending on what's going on in the business at that point in time. Your virtual environment, if sized correctly, will be heavily flexed at certain times in the day and will have a much lighter load in the off-peak hours, such as the late evening or early morning. As this workload increases, the available resources in your virtual environment will decrease as all of those guest machines tend to gobble up as much memory and processing power as they've been configured to have access to. A responsible admin will obviously weigh all of this out so that you're not allocating more resources than are available in your hardware. So the nature of shared environment is just that. As each machine tends to work a little harder, it will take a little bit of memory of it from the pool that's available, and in theory, eventually you could get to a place where you've run out of resources during those peak times. You'll see machines fighting for those available resources, while under a light workload, most of those resources will go unused, in some cases for as much as half of a day. So you've got this dedicated, expensive piece of hardware that may sit around almost idle for as much as half of the day. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean we can buy half of the hardware because there's no way to change that workload structure throughout that 24-hour period. So if you have enough off-peak time to perform your backup window, again, which is the duration of time that it takes to run your backup start to finish, then a virtual backup appliance might be a great way for you to recoup some of the costs that you've sunk into that centralized hardware. But be mindful that a virtual backup appliance can have negative impact on the rest of your virtual machines. So as you see on the bottom there, features like compression or deduplication do have a very large workload. Effectively, the resources that you give them are going to directly correspond to the performance that they're going to be able to give you back. In a shared resources environment, you may have that backup server taking resources that may also be needed by other guest machines. So it's very important to have a good understanding of what the structure of that workload is throughout the day. Also keeping in mind, while your backup storage should not be located in the same physical storage array as your production data, you are still going to access that production data array very heavily during your backup jobs. This is also could have an impact if you have other processes being performed in conjunction with your backup, because your storage arrays can only go so fast. So redundant arrays or a larger array may also be required to use a virtual backup appliance. So there are some benefits, but there are definitely some things to keep in mind when it comes to the workload of your virtual infrastructure. And this is really where WD can help. The additional risk that's inherent with centralizing, historically, before virtualization, we would have many servers throughout the environment, and those servers, one of them could have failed, causing your business productivity to limp along a little bit. But it would be very rare, without a natural disaster, that you would lose multiple pieces of hardware at the same time. So as you've spent all of this time, money, and effort in order to centralize all of this onto a single piece of hardware, that inherent risk is very, very dangerous. So WD has two main paths that we can take to help make sure that you are just as protected as you were before. The first place that we can help is in the storage specifically designed for your virtual infrastructure. There's only so many disks that you can attach into a physical piece of hardware, but if you have multiple small virtual machines with large disks, you could run out of available space. You can only plug in so many 4 or 5 or 6 terabyte drives. Adding in a networked storage solution like the MyCloud EX4 allows you the ability to scale from, again, 2 terabytes up to a 16 terabyte array that has most of the business class features that you're used to, whether that's redundant power supplies, network cards, or even the ability to sync these two together in a highly available cluster. All helps make sure that if any single piece of hardware fails, that you have a cold spare sitting by waiting to take up that workload immediately. And that's great as far as hardware failure goes. But like I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of other types of failure. If you have a virus, for example, that compromises the data on one of those EX4s that were mirrored to another, that's going to mirror over all the same corruption onto both arrays. So a backup solution is going to be the only way to provide that point-in-time security that has made backup so imperative and so important, not only before virtualization, but especially more so now. So the WD Archaea range of products is a standalone backup application. As I mentioned, we could do this as a virtual appliance, but it does have its own benefits and limitations there. So in the event that we wanted to have a dedicated storage platform with the hardware required to perform processes like deduplication, compression, and backup, these boxes are going to scale again from 2 up to 48 terabytes as far as backup storage is concerned. We can deploy this as a software solution as that virtual appliance or as any one of our physical appliances that are offered. The nice thing that has made the physical appliance so popular is, again, because of that security. Because this is a purpose-built backup appliance, not only does a large amount of expertise technically go into selecting the hardware the amount of memory, the processes that are used, and even all the way down to the type of memory and the type of hard drives that are utilized in our backup application. They've all been designed specifically for the size of that backup array. The hardened operating system keeps vulnerabilities to a very low point because we've stripped out all of those extraneous applications that would be inherent in an off-the-shelf OS. So you have a hardened operating system and isolated hardware providing you another layer of defense from that hardware failure. Again, redundancy could also be important here. We do have a dedicated backup appliance, and in this case, redundancy can mean a couple of things, whether we deploy another backup server on site so that we have a very quick way to roll over in the event of a hardware failure, or we could replicate that data through a feature like cloud storage replication off to another target completely. So even if the entire network were to be taken down, like in a natural disaster or a fire, we still have another copy of all of our mission-critical data off-site somewhere that we can begin restoring from immediately. So between your storage and protecting the data on that storage, we've got a number of options there. But what happens as we continue to grow? Usually if we've looked to embrace virtualization, that's because our environment or maybe our workload, something has changed in our corporate infrastructure, and the chances are that was growth over the time that the original hardware was acquired. So there's two real scenarios here that we see on a regular basis that people have either an increased amount of data, their data is growing faster, but the server count stays the same. And on the other side of that coin, you may have a large amount of increased server count. So for any number of reasons, either one of those could be something that you're experiencing today. And when it comes to increasing the volume of your data, things like progressive deduplication come into play and become extremely important. Sorry, I needed a drink there. Progressive dedupe, while it does, most people think of dedupe, the benefit of dedupe, in being the amount of storage that you utilize on the back end. By using dedupe, you can limit the amount of storage required. But it goes a bit farther than that if you have a modern deduplication algorithm. Our progressive deduplication is not only the most aggressive at targeting the changed blocks, it's also a very fast algorithm. So before progressive dedupe, you had to basically trade performance for compression ratio. You could either have fast backups or you could have heavily compressed backups that used light space. Now we're able to provide you with the best of both worlds. Redundancy built into the server sprawl of virtual environments. There's no hardware to purchase, so the number of servers does tend to grow faster than if you had to purchase them physically. And that's also great with all the redundancy that comes with multiple copies of an operating system. The data volume as well, depending on the backup solution that you have, there's a certain amount of client workload, and then there's going to be a certain amount of backup server workload. With the difference between scenarios 1 and 2 is increasing your data volume is going to increase the backup workload more so than the client workload. This means that a lot of people in this environment need to increase the size of their backup servers, but with the WDRKIA product family, we can actually offload some of those processes like compression and deduplication off to the client sides themselves, so we can help balance out that increased workload so we don't have to necessarily buy a new backup server every time we add another terabyte of data to our environment. So if you can't increase that and you can't offload them, you may want to look towards some data being expendable as far as do I want to only back up the application data instead of a full image backup on this machine? So an administrator in a tight budget environment may have to go in and start eliminating not so important data from their backup strategy. Obviously, there's some risk there as well. So scaling up or scaling out, I guess I jumped the ball on that one, but that goes back to that deduplication. Scaling up would require you to buy a new backup server every time, which is why we prefer to scale out, allowing our progressive dedupe to offload that processing to the client-side machine so we can spread out that workload and use that same piece of hardware longer. So the differences on the server count usually have to do with maybe a mix of physical and virtual machines. As you virtualize some machines, you may end up running both of them for a certain amount of time to make sure that everything goes well. There's a very large platform support in our backup solution, so even during an acquisition, which is another common example of why server count could increase dramatically. So being able to protect over 240 different platforms is very important in selecting a solution that you know can not only handle what you have now, but also what you may acquire in the future. And then production and development. Production may run on a VMware environment where development may still be running on a KVM or some other free environment. So getting a single pane of glass for the entire backup strategy is something that WD can help provide. Again, the same thing comes into play here, scaling up when this increase happens or scaling out. Not all backup solutions can provide you either option like WD could. Okay, so this is my favorite slide, being kind of a car guy myself, if you didn't notice from my analogy earlier. What we really want to talk about here, or what we really want you to take away from today's environment, is being able to leverage that horsepower, whether it's using that off-peak time to run a virtual appliance, or you want to use that very large virtual appliance and all of its available memory for things like source-side deduplication. We can use that even in high traffic times. So while a virtual appliance may not make that much sense in a high off-peak workload, if we do have some downtime, we can still use it to do processes for our backup server while not taking all of the workload to the backups to the virtual environment itself. So large hardware can offload these labor-intensive processes. So the very important feature here being source-side deduplication, being able to run that processing engine on the client or on the backup server. Running it on the client makes a smaller workload on the backup server. So deduplication, encryption, and compression, all of these are very labor-intensive processes that can benefit from offloading, allowing you to scale out. And then deploying a backup appliance, if you do still decide that this is something that could work in your environment, as I've mentioned or alluded to a couple of times, it is imperative in a virtual backup appliance environment that we have isolated storage for your backups. So even if you're running your production data on a redundant cluster of 2 EX4s, for example, giving you 16 terabytes of usable space, it's still important to have another device, maybe even another redundant cluster for your backup storage as well. Again, you can have this type of functionality built into our WD physical appliance line, but if you did want to go with the virtual appliance, pay special attention to the high workload and traffic times in your specific environment to make sure that you're not expecting that hardware to pull double duty both at the same time. And that brings me to, there's a couple of things that I've mentioned today in our scenarios specifically. When we increase server count, for example, through that acquisition example that I had, a lot of other vendors would nickel and dime you as far as the number of agents that you'd need. So you may need to go back and buy more storage space. You need to go back and buy more agents and all of this additional expense. For the current release of the WDR Key appliance, we're actually running a promotion through the next, I'm not sure how long that runs. I'll have to, if you're interested, my email address comes up in a second. But that promotion right now is essentially giving you all of our software agents for zero cost. You're just buying the backup server. This does apply to our physical backup servers, which would provide you that hardened operating system as well as an isolated place to store all of your backup data. But you don't have to worry about increasing the server count because all those agents are going to be included in unlimited quantities. So whether it's more file system backups that you're looking for, or maybe a large number of SQL databases or something along those lines, Maybe you are backing up your applications right now using a homebrewed method where you're dumping that using internal tools in the application. By using a hot backup agent designed to protect that specific application, you're going to get a higher level of granularity, and most likely you're going to have, through the ability of doing full and incremental backups, you're going to have the ability to do many more restore points in time, which is going to minimize the amount of risk as well as maximize that restore point objective. Okay, so from there, we're going to, I think this is the last slide, and then we're going to jump into a brief demonstration of the user interface. So if anybody does have any questions about the virtualization specifically, please, as Matt mentioned, take a second to jot those down in the questions box, and we'll make sure to answer those for you at the end. So let's see if I can make this seamless for you here. Okay, and I'm going to give that a second to upload, make sure everybody can see the same things that I'm looking at. And while that loads, what we're going to be looking at today is a DA2300. And this is the last of our pedestal units in the physical appliance line. So it's available in either a 4 or an 8 terabyte device. Today we're looking at a 4 terabyte unit, but with the dashboard, what we try to accomplish here is one place to go. Once the system is up and running, we want the administrator to be able to have one place, that dashboard, where they can do most of their daily maintenance or ongoing maintenance items, whether it's starting another backup job like down here in the direct access or even a restoration. All of those are going to be available on that splash screen as soon as you log in. I did mention a lot about virtualization today, but this solution can protect physical and virtual environments both at the same time, even in the same backup job if you desire that. So when it comes to backing up physical machines, we would install a backup agent into that operating system in order to connect to that machine, back up all of its data or its application. You may also have some virtual machines that you treat this way. There are some vendors out there that only support virtualization, and most rely on the hypervisor, that virtualization software itself, to protect these applications. These rarely work, and they result in what's called a crash-consistent backup because they're not able to quiesce that application, shutting it down appropriately in order to back up that open file. We always recommend with virtualized applications that you treat them as a physical machine by installing our hot backup agent inside of that virtual guest machine. One example of that here would be this Server 2008 machine, which has my Exchange and Active Directory. So I've treated that virtual machine both as a physical and a virtual machine. When it comes to VMware, again, they've been around the longest. They have this agentless backup API called vStorage. This works with ESX or ESXi as well as vCenter clusters. So depending on how many of those features from VMware that you've paid for, you may go to a host directly, or you may go through your vCenter server, allowing you to protect all of your virtual machines, even if you have the data center edition features where they move from physical hardware to physical hardware. The backup server can still follow them. So this is very easy to set up. You're just looking for a host name, a username, and an IP address. But this is the agentless method. If we talk about most of the other, any of the other backups, what we would actually do is install an agent onto the hypervisor, the host level itself, and from there we would add that as a physical machine, allowing us to do all of the backups underneath it. Okay, so when it comes to creating a backup job, there's a lot of power in here. But there's not a whole lot of criteria that has to be configured in order to move forward. So I could proceed to the next screen after giving this backup job a name so that I can keep track of it not only in my index and my reports, but also when I'm doing a restoration. You may end up backing one machine up in multiple ways in multiple save packs. If you label them appropriately, you always know where that restoration candidate is that you need. Again, deduplication, any good backup solution should allow you the ability to select between the backup at the backup server, at the target, or at the client-side machine, which we would call the source. Again, because of that additional workload, you'll see we give you the ability to fail back to doing that backup or that deduplication at the backup server if the workload on your client ever increases so much that we can't do that and the deduplication. So there is a safeguard coded into the agent as well. And once I've selected all of those as my global options, there are many options we can go through, but please feel free to shoot me an email if you'd like a more in-depth demo. But once we've configured those global options, the next step is to come through and select the data that we want to protect. This is a Linux Linux machine that I have. It's actually set up to be my SQL server, and we can see that MySQL plugin installed right here, allowing me, you may have noticed when I expanded the file data, I'm not sure if I did that too fast, but I could go through all of the files and back up the directory where my application is storing all of its data. Well, that's going to give me that same crash consistent backup that we would have if we were using snapshots in a virtual environment trying to protect app data. Now, though, I could, depending on what I want to check off, if I select a particular database, I could check this box off and only protect one table. I could check off the one by the database, protecting all of the tables and its configuration, or I can check off the entire application, backing up all of the, not only the app data, but also the configuration of that server as well. So depending on which box we check, you have a lot of different options here. We can also do, so there's a Linux application that we're doing. We'll go ahead and why not throw in an Exchange backup as well, just to show that we can do Linux and Windows both at the same time. Windows is a bit unique because it uses the volume shadow copy service. And because it has its own way for doing backups, we treat that as the best practice as well. So I can back up both of my Windows applications and my Linux application. Those are all, well, treated as physical machines. But we'll show you as well through my vStorage API that I can protect that same Server 2008, where is it, Exchange 01. Now I'm backing that up not only at the application level, but I'm also going to protect this at the VM level, allowing me to do a full virtual image restore. This way I have two different backups. It will increase the amount of time in my backup window as it processes that disk twice, but deduplication is going to filter all of that out on the back end. So I'm not wasting anything other than the time or the workload on that one particular machine. The restoration options are immense because now I could do the entire machine, just the data. I can essentially cover any type of restore on that machine electronically possible. So I've got some Linux, I've got some virtual, I've got some physical, I've got some Windows. There's really no limit to what we can do in a backup job here. The only limitation, I guess I shouldn't say there's no limit. The only limitation to what can go in a save pack and what needs its own has to do with the retention policy. We'll go ahead and finish this out. What is that called? Test backup job. So when we go to create a schedule, the schedule is where we establish the retention policy. Essentially, how long do I keep the data on file before recycling it to make room for new backups? Because we're doing that at the schedule, all of the machines that I have in a save pack will have the same retention policy. So if my payroll records need to be retained for 7 years to comply with federal regulation, but my employee database, I probably don't need to keep that long. So I would want to make sure that those were in two separate save packs so I didn't have to keep everything in my environment just to satisfy those payroll requirements. So we'll give this a name as well. I recommend that most people do a weekly full and a daily incremental. If we get more than those backups, as far as maybe a monthly full or something along those lines, that's either a holdover from an older tape strategy, or maybe a federal compliance issue where you need to dump some of your data off to tape for extremely long retention, while most of your useful information just stays on disk locally for quick backup and restore. So what we can do here, let's say we want to do a weekly full and a daily incremental. We pick the day that we want to run that at and the time of day. Pretty easy. If you've ever been through setting up a Windows environment, it should look pretty similar. And then I can specify, 4 weeks, 1 month, that kind of stuff as far as how long I want that to stay. Essentially any number of days, weeks, months, or years as far as the retention policy is concerned. After I've configured that to meet my requirements, I can come in here and do a backup to disk, for example, selecting my backup job that I created. The drive pack is a fancy way of saying storage location on all the appliances that will come pre-configured for you. And then we can chain additional processes onto this. Maybe I want to replicate this off to a tape drive 5 minutes after the data comes to rest on a hard disk. I can also do the same thing with cloud storage if I wanted to replicate that over the WAN to another Archaea backup server somewhere off on the World Wide Web. So once I've created my jobs and I scheduled those jobs to run, some people may want more aggressive backup strategies. So as I mentioned, we could do something along the lines of creating another schedule. So each one of these is only going to perform a daily incremental. So I went through and created something else called afternoon backups. I'm going to pretend like this is a daily full. We'll run this at 12:30. Maybe people will be off at lunch. And we're going to set this up as another incremental for that full backup. So what we can essentially do is add in another. Where's my afternoon backup? Okay, so we'll change this one over. This is probably a bit higher level than I needed to go into for today's demonstration, but application backup is the application schedules. So now application schedules, I'm going to do one backup at 8 o'clock at night, and I've got another one now in afternoon backups that runs at noon. We can keep adding in levels to this afternoon backup. And now I can come into afternoon backups, and I will set this up at noon again every day. Only this time we're going to select a different save pack. Now we'll do the file level backups. We'll do an incremental, and we'll specify this off of the file level schedules. So I can continue with this process. I could even create an evening backup schedule if I wanted. And so the more of these schedules that I can create, I could essentially back up maybe every hour or every couple of minutes. Again, it all depends on the amount of effort that the administrator wants to put into creating their backup strategy. This is where having a good vendor who has a lot of expertise in backup environments, having this this type of flexibility allows you really to do to support any type of backup strategy that you may require. So from there, the point in doing this is to be able to restore. So I'm not going to go too much. There's another webinar specifically on restorations if you'd like to see that. But I do want to point out that there are multiple options. So when it comes to restoring things like VMware, you'll see the only difference here is the ability to do an image level restore or a file level restore. That image level restore will rebuild the entire virtual machine. We do support redirection, so you could even rename that and use this as a way to clone a virtual machine. You'll have a little bit of issue as far as IP addresses and host name, but go in and change those before you connect it to the network, and you should be fine. The other option, again, if you notice, there was one specifically for Microsoft. We back them up a special way, and so we restore them a special way. Here, it's based on application and the volume shadow copy service. So if I were to select a particular machine with an Exchange server, unfortunately, I don't have the ability to show you too much detail. We are able to restore down to the mailbox level by default, right out of the box. And normally I would be able to navigate down and to see those mailboxes. I've only installed this application. I've never actually set up any users on it, so I can't actually show you that, unfortunately. And then the last one, for everything that's not VMware or Microsoft applications, is going to fall into this catch-all. It's got quite a few more options as far as date ranges. These slider bars you'll see are tied into a date range, and they'll filter out all. You may have seen a couple of those things disappear, and that's because they were not backed up during this date range. I can also get much more granular than that if I wanted to restore a particular machine, or maybe in this example here is going to be a specific file. I can select that file, and then if I click on it, I can see all of the point-in-time restoration options that I have. So we see me backing this up at 1020 every day. Must be 1020 is the date that or the time that I run my incremental there. We support redirection on all of ours, again, as I mentioned, so anything that holds an Archaea agent can be a restoration target. And then the last thing that I'll show you guys, actually two more things. I do want to brag about my deduplication ratio. We should be over 10 to 1 today. And there's two things that increase the amount of compression that dedup can provide. The most common is duplication within your environment. Things like virtual infrastructures that have multiple copies of the same operating system, they dedup well. Other types of information like videos or images that are already compressed aren't going to deduplicate, and if they do, it won't be very much. The other way to increase your deduplication ratio is to keep your backups for a longer period of time. So the more restore points you have on a particular backup server, the better your deduplication ratio is going to get, either by increasing the amount of backups you perform per day or by increasing the amount of data that you hold long term. So still not to 11 yet, but I'm working on it. We've only had it running for a short amount of time here. And then the last one to show you guys is the backup reports. Obviously, we want to make sure that this system is running healthy. We did have the subset of those reports on the main dashboard screen, and if I were to click on that, it would actually dump me into this page. On this page, I can see a copy of all the individual trees that were backed up during that job. I can click on the magnifying glass to get a copy of the summary report, and the summary report is what gets emailed out at the end of each backup job. So this is just a way to get another copy of that without going back through your email, or maybe you weren't the person who received the email. But I can again see all that information about the per backup job per tree. But then if I wanted to get even more detail, actually let's not use this as an example. Let's go find one that didn't complete well. So on this particular job, we can see something has happened because it's orange or yellow, depending on what you want to call it. So I can use this detailed report to scroll down and see, well, it didn't back up these directories, but since these are all created on boot anyway, they're not too important, so I'm not worried about that. I could either ignore them, or I could go back in and omit those particular directories within my SavePack creation. And then we see here my exchange wasn't correct. I wasn't able to actually connect to that machine because of my credentials I was using. So it'll give me the information I need to diagnose how to fix my backup environment, or at least that particular problem, and tell me why it threw that error. You may have also noticed as well that we're not just giving you an error code. We're actually giving you useful information about what went wrong. So if you've ever used some of those very large backup solutions by vendors that I won't name today, but they're notorious for just kicking out an error code. You've got to take that error code either to Google or to their support department directly to figure out what that means. But we do still have the error codes on the back end, but we deliver those to the end user on the front end in plain text so that they can actually make some adjustments or make some decisions on their own. Again, our award-winning support department is still going to be available to help you out there, but it's not a necessity like it is with some other solutions. So I think from there, I've got another 10 minutes, so I guess I got done in a reasonable amount of time. So I will turn it back over to Matt, I guess, and see if we have any questions or comments. And while I do that, why don't I switch this back over to my slide with my email address, just in case anybody needs to reach out and get in touch with me if we don't answer your questions. So thanks for your time, Spice Heads. My name's Jeff, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Take it away, Matt.
Yep. Hey, Jeff.
All right. Hey, everyone.
We had a few.
Oh. Go ahead, Britton. Sorry, I was going to introduce you, but go right ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get started. We had quite a few questions come in, so I'll try to get to all of them. First question, do all of the virtualization vendors offer the same mechanisms for backup?
They do not. One of the slides we went through showed some of the limitations of some of those. So I believe Matt said this would be available through Spiceworks in the future. They're all able to be protected. They all do provide you with features that allow you to back them up, but how that is accomplished varies greatly from hypervisor to hypervisor.
Okay, next question. Can Archaea send data from a virtual machine to the cloud?
And that, I'm not sure what that question means, but if you're talking about can I back up a virtual machine and send that backup data to the cloud, that's not a problem at all, but we would only be able to send a backup set to the cloud. So I can't connect to the virtual machine and send just any of its data out to the cloud. I would first back it up and write it as a compressed file before transporting it over the WAN to the cloud storage target. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, just put it back in the list, and we'll get to that again in a second.
Okay, next question. Can Archaea simultaneously protect both Hyper-V and VMware in a single backup job?
Oh, most definitely. One example I gave earlier was a development environment where they may be using a free hypervisor, and then you might have a commercial hypervisor deployed for your production environment. So that's not a problem at all. We can cross-pollinate. That's not the right word, but we can definitely take multiple hypervisors and back them up, even within the same backup job, although I would probably recommend doing that with two separate backup jobs just to keep them, especially if they were different vendors like that, just to keep them separate.
Okay, it looks like that was the last question, so I'm going to pass it back over to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Britton. Hey, just want to thank everyone for coming out today and joining us on this webinar. I hope you all learned a lot today, and just want to thank Jeff again for his great presentation. Just a reminder to everyone that if you missed any part of this or would like to rewatch it, you will be getting an email here in a few days, and that will have a link to a on-demand video of this webinar. But other than that, just want to thank Jeff again and thank everyone for coming out, and have a good afternoon. Thanks.